The need comes from this sort of mindset of balkanization of Syria. That's why, because Turkey, it seems that they cannot, single-handedly go confront this situation with Israel and the United States. That's why they need to some sort of cooperation with the axis of resistance. I don't know how do they bring Iran and Russia to their calculation, and do they really reaching out to Iran to see if there is a possibility to avoid balkanization of Syria, which is so important?
Well, Jolani himself has been reaching out to Iran for a number of weeks now. And as far as I know, the Iranians have not given any clear answer. The fact remains that the situation in Syria is growing worse. Jolani is a weak leader. The country is deeply divided. Turkey is anger is has increased towards Turkey substantially because people see that Erdogan has led the country towards a situation where it can no longer hold itself together and it can no longer, of course, defend itself. So Erdogan is seeking uh, a renewed relationship with parts of the axis of resistance in his own way. But Jolani separately is also trying to make contact. The discussions in Moscow, of course, were to ease the problems with Russia, but this is not going to solve the problem. Ultimately, uh, the United States, the belief in Tehran is that when Jolani has achieved what the Israelis want him to achieve, he will be removed. He will be dealt with. Remember, Jolani is a tool of empire. He is an asset of the CIA. When the Israeli regime attacks Yemen, they murdered the prime minister and cabinet members. They murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and leaders, senior officials in Hezbollah. They tried to murder senior officials in Iran and murdered a number of very senior commanders. But the Israelis have never tried to take out Jolani. They've never tried to take out any of his senior leaders because he is in their camp. He is a part of the CIA project, and the CIA never works against the interests of the Israeli regime. So he does try to seek a different relationship with Iran. Uh, Erdogan is trying to seek a different relationship with the axis of resistance. But even if there were going to be positive responses, how far can it go when this organization is so deeply compromised and so weak and vulnerable?
Do you think that I think the situation in Syria can somehow help the position of Iran and the axis of resistance? Because you've mentioned the case of ISIS and Al Qaeda. They have never attacked Israel. And that's the biggest, anybody who believes that the ISIS and these are real jihadis, Islamists, you look at the history of these groups, you can learn a lot from their behavior. And uh, but after all, do you do you believe that the United States can achieve what they want to achieve in Syria, or it's going to be a such, what's going on in Gaza? Israel went full with all the weapons they have. They couldn't achieve their objective in Gaza. And the question is, why does the United States feel that this time around going to be different and they're going to achieve something in Syria, which we know that the people in Syria are not happy with the current, regime in Syria, and with overall the presence of the United States, which was, the main, you remember before the fall of Assad, the United States has captured, the infrastructure, oil infrastructure, everything to suffocate the government in Syria. Is that going to change? That is not just Assad. You see the resistance right now in Syria. And I don't know if they feel that this time around going to be different. Your take on that, Professor?
The powers that are now influential in Syria, the Israeli regime, the Americans, Erdogan, none of them have an interest in a strong and independent Syria. But the problem is that none of them have the power to control Syria. I mean, Erdogan can put his bases in different parts of the country, and Netanyahu can occupy significant parts of southern Syria. But it is going to be costly, at least for the months and years to come. This is all going to be costly for the occupiers. So I don't see this as beneficial. Syria has become, and this is something that we discussed on day one, that Syria is going to. We said that Syria is going to become a burden, and it has become a burden. No one has invested. All the lies about the investments in Syria from Qatar and others, they've all turned out to be lies, as we knew they'd be lies. That we knew they were lying. Now, what happens in the future is difficult to say. It's There are so many different scenarios that that we can envisage, that it's really impossible to say, what is the fate of Syria. But I personally think that this is not going to end well, either for Erdogan or for the Israeli regime, and that Syria is going to continue to consume their uh, it's going to force them to consume their own resources. I mean, Turkey may export some Turkish goods to Syria, but the country is impoverished. The market is going to be very limited. And on the other hand, Turkish forces and its support for its proxies in Syria, the terrorists, especially the foreign terrorists that it pays and controls, along with Qatar and through Qatar. This is going to be, on the whole, it's going to be a burden. It's going to be a security burden. It's going to be an economic burden. So I don't think this is going to end well for either side. Remember, the Iranians and the Russians were paying a lot of money to keep Syria afloat. The Iranians gave Syria free oil, and it's helped. It gave them free medicine. The Russians gave fuel and grain. That was a burden to these countries. So, but the Israeli regime and Erdogan, they're not willing to make those sort of sacrifices or give that sort of funding to keep their terrorists afloat in Syria. So I don't think that this is going to be good for Israel in the short term. I think it's going to make it more difficult for it to engage in any war with Hezbollah, because they have to protect their assets and their position in Syria simultaneously. I don't think Erdogan can do much more than what he is already doing. The situation inside Turkey is not exceptionally good for him, and he also feels threatened by the Israeli regime. I was at a conference recently where a Turkish analyst very close to the government was saying that Turkey is very worried about conflict with the Israeli regime in Syria, and Turkey obviously feels weak and vulnerable against the regime. It made a foolish mistake by pursuing its Ottoman ambitions without thinking through the implications of these policies. And so it's a complicated situation. But I don't think Syria is going to is I don't think they're strong enough to swallow Syria and to take it for their own. It's going to be costly, but the end, I don't know. Hopefully, at some point, the people of Syria will be able to unite and to create a resistance, to expel the occupation forces. Um, but the road ahead looks very it's it's very unclear.
I don't know if you saw the video in which Robert Ford, the former US diplomat, and he was talking about how he was involved in preparing Al Jolani for the position that he has right now in Syria. He said that he was called by MI6, the British intelligence. It was somehow amazing to me that knowing that He wasn't called by CIA, was called first by MI6. What is the British role in Syria for their project, which is Israel? Israel, many people consider Israel as a British project in the Middle East. But what do they want from, Syria, the British government?
Well, Hanima, I know him. I know him pretty well. And we've met many times. And I actually had a one on one breakfast with him for more than 3 hours, the two of us, at these track two conferences and the Middle East Institute and other, conferences. Um, he, it was the dirty war in Syria was clear as day that this was a conspiracy to destroy Syria. And Qatar and Erdogan were part of this. And this person, when you would speak with him, it was clear that he knew what they were doing to Syria. And sometimes he would pretend, not to know certain things, and I, you know, give him the facts, and he'd have to back down. He, his they, the role of the United States and the British is extreme has been extremely sinister, and he was a part of this dirty war from day one. When it was going badly, and the Syrian government was able to restore much of its sovereignty, they became very hopeless, and uh, they started speaking truths in conversations that we'd have together. I guess because they thought that this was over. But as they succeeded in starving Syria, because what happened was that they literally brought the Syrian people to their knees. They crushed Syria. They destroyed it. People were in some parts of Syria. People were literally starving when the government fell. That's how bad it was because of um, the sanctions, uh, the uh, what's the occupation, the theft of the Americans, as you pointed out, the stealing of grain and oil from northeastern Syria. It had taken a toll, and the Syrian government, in the hope that it could have a better relationship with the West, it tilted towards Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates did nothing for them. All that happened was that their relationship with the resistance and with the Russians, to a lesser degree, were further weakened, and the situation just continued to get worse until the collapse took place. But yes, Jolani was being prepared to become the leader for many years. I tweeted this. There's a clip where when Jolani breaks away from Al Qaeda, because Jolani was from the Islamic State in Iraq. And then they sent him to Syria to head the Nusra Front, Al Qaeda in Syria. And then when the Islamic State in Iraq became the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, or Syria or whatever, ISIS or Daesh, he refused to accept. And that caused a split between the Islamic State of Iraq, or now ISIS, and the Nusra Front. And Al Qaeda Central, they took his side in this fight, in this divide, in this conflict. And that caused ISIS to break away from Al Qaeda. So Jolani was supported in Syria by Al Qaeda. So he was a part of ISIS. He was a co-founder, and then he led Al Qaeda in Syria when ISIS was still a part of Al Qaeda. Then when ISIS broke away, he remained in Al Qaeda, and then years later he split away from Al Qaeda. But how? Al Qaeda leaders were in the room with him when he split away. They let him do it with their consent. I mean, Al Qaeda, Al Qaeda Central Command in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Why? Because they wanted him to be able to rebrand himself and rebrand his organization. so that he could have greater influence. It was clear as day what was happening. Al Qaeda was doing this in communication, in coordination with Western intelligence agencies. And as you rightly pointed out, Al Qaeda never carries out attacks uh, on on the Israeli regime. It doesn't carry out attacks against Turkey, but you see, huge attacks where they murder hundreds of people in Russia, or hundreds of people in Iran. Remember the massacre in Kerman when during the um, commemoration of General Soleimani. I think tens of people. I don't remember the number. Maybe 100 people were slaughtered. Now, that doesn't happen to those countries where they come from. Remember, in 2014, Nima, I said this on another program yesterday. Serena Sheen, she was the journalist for Press TV, an American Lebanese journalist for Press TV. She went to the border between Turkey and Syria in 2014 and said that World Food Organization World Food Organization trucks, were being used to take in troops and ammunition for ISIS in the Kobani area, in the Ain al Arab area at that time. And then Turkish intelligence stated that she is a spy. Uh, and she went on Press TV and said, I just heard that they're saying I'm a spy. I'm not a spy. I'm just a journalist. And then she was killed hours later. Her family, Press TV, her colleagues all believe that Turkish intelligence, under the current foreign minister, murdered her. They deny it, and I don't have evidence either way. But it does seem that they murdered her. What was she showing? The relationship between ISIS and uh, Western intelligence agencies, because the Turkish intelligence agency is a Western intelligence agency. It's not independent; they're part of NATO. So ISIS, Al Qaeda, when they allowed Jolani, or they cooperated with Jolani to rebrand himself, it was all done in coordination with Western intelligence agencies. And Al Jazeera was helping, doing interviews with him and helping him to present himself in a different light. Then we saw CNN get involved, and then, of course, the ambassador. So all of this was a part of a process to prepare the grounds for Al Qaeda to come to power. And now we see that he is able to go through the back door, of course, and sitting like an obedient kindergarten student in front of the headmaster, but still, he ultimately made his way to the White House.